Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive structure floating in space ahead of his ship and felt his heart skip a beat. The UES Horizon had been exploring empty space for 3 months when their navigation system failed and brought them to this place. What they found here was beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. The structure was enormous, bigger than any city on Earth. It looked like a giant wheel spinning slowly in the darkness of space, with thousands of lights blinking. Across its surface, ships of strange shapes and sizes moved around it like insects around a bright lamp. Jake had never seen anything like these vessels before. Dr. Lisa Carter moved to stand beside him at the bridge window. She was the ship's expert on alien life, though until now she had only studied theories and possibilities. Her hands shook slightly as she watched the alien ships moving with purpose around the massive station. Commander Ben Taylor joined them, his military training making him automatically assess threats and defenses. The alien ships were clearly advanced beyond human technology, but they did not seem hostile. They moved in organized patterns like they were following traffic rules rather than preparing for battle. Jake turned to his communications officer. The young woman was already working to intercept and analyze the radio signals coming from the station. Her equipment showed waves of data flowing between the station and the ships, but none of it made sense to human ears or computers. The first sign that they had been noticed came when 3 alien ships changed course and moved toward the horizon. These vessels were sleek and silver, moving without any visible engines or exhaust. They positioned themselves around the human ship in what was clearly a defensive formation. Lisa quickly moved to her station and began preparing humanity's first contact protocols. She had studied every theory about meeting alien life, but facing the reality made her realize how little humans actually knew. She activated the ship's mathematical beacon, broadcasting prime numbers and basic physics equations in the hope that intelligence would recognize intelligence. The response came faster than anyone expected. One of the alien ships projected a beam of light that formed symbols in space between them. The symbols shifted and changed, showing mathematical concepts that grew more complex by the second. Lisa watched in amazement as the aliens demonstrated their understanding of human mathematics and then expanded it into areas that human science had not yet explored. Ben remained focused on the tactical situation. More alien ships were arriving, and they came in designs that seemed impossible. Some looked like living creatures made of metal. Others appeared to be constructed from pure crystal. A few seemed to bend light around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. Jake made the decision that would change everything for humanity. Instead of running or trying to fight, he ordered his crew to respond to the aliens' mathematical communication. Lisa worked frantically to create responses that showed human intelligence while remaining peaceful and non-threatening. The alien ships began moving the horizon toward the massive station. Jake realized they were being escorted rather than captured, though he was not sure there was much difference. His ship had no weapons that could threaten these advanced vessels, and running was not an option with their damaged navigation system. As they approached the station, its true size became clear. The structure was not just bigger than a city, but bigger than most countries. Millions of beings lived and worked inside this artificial world. The aliens were bringing humanity to what was clearly the center of a vast civilization. The docking process happened automatically. The alien station extended mechanical arms that gently grabbed the horizon and pulled it into a bay designed for ships much larger than anything humans had built. The bay sealed around them, and Jake watched his instruments register that atmosphere was being pumped in around his ship. Lisa detected that the air outside matched what humans needed to breathe. This was either an incredible coincidence or the aliens had already learned enough about human biology to create a suitable environment. Both possibilities were unsettling in different ways. A voice spoke through the ship's communication system in perfect English. The accent was strange, and the tone was too formal, but every word was clear and correct. The voice introduced itself as a translation system and requested that human representatives come aboard the station for formal contact procedures. Jake felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. He was about to become the first human to meet alien intelligence. Face to face, the responsibility was enormous. and he knew that everything he did in the next few hours could determine humanity's future relationship with this advanced civilization. Ben insisted on coming along as security, while Lisa prepared her equipment to record and analyze everything they encountered. The three of them put on their best uniforms and checked their recording devices. They were about to step into a larger universe than humanity had ever known existed. The airlock opened to reveal a corridor that stretched further than they could see. The walls were made of materials that seemed to shift color as they watched. Lights moved along the ceiling in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. Everything was designed for beings much larger than humans. Their escort arrived in the form of a creature that defied easy description. It stood twice as tall as a human on 4 legs that looked like they were made of living metal. Its torso was covered in what might have been scales or might have been some kind of advanced technology. Multiple arms ended in hands that had 2. Many fingers, and its head held eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The creature spoke through a device that translated its words into English. It welcomed the humans to Nexus Prime, the center of the Galactic Council. Jake realized that they had not just encountered alien life, but had stumbled into the government center of multiple alien civilizations working together. As they walked, through corridors filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, Jake began to understand that humanity was about to join something vast and ancient. The question was whether they would be welcomed as equals or cataloged as another primitive species to be managed and controlled. The next few hours would determine which path their species would take among the stars. Administrator Kexmoth clicked his mandibles in frustration as he stared at the reports scattered across his desk. For 3,000 years, every species that joined the Galactic Council had fit neatly into established categories: warriors, scholars, builders, traders, or servants. Each new species found their place in the hierarchy based on clear measurements of technology, lifespan, and psychic ability. But these humans were breaking every rule. The insectoid administrator picked up another report with one of his 4 arms while using 2 others to operate his analysis equipment. The humans scored impossibly low on individual psychic potential, showing almost no ability to manipulate energy with their minds. Yet their ship's computers somehow processed information in ways that mimicked psychic networking. They lived shorter lives than most council species managed in a single career cycle, but their technological advancement rate suggested they learned faster than anyone thought possible. Dr. Amy Rodriguez sat in her temporary quarters aboard Nexus Prime, studying video recordings of the various alien species she had encountered. As a psychologist, she was trained to understand behavior patterns, but what she was seeing challenged everything humans thought they knew about intelligence and civilization. Most council species seemed locked into rigid patterns that had not changed in millions of years. The warrior castes always responded to problems with force or threats of force. The scholar classes approached every situation through lengthy theoretical analysis. The builder species focused entirely on engineering solutions. Each group was incredibly good at what they did, but none of them seemed capable of changing their approach when their usual methods failed. Lieutenant Sam Brooks worked in the engineering section that the council had assigned to examine human technology. His job was supposed to be demonstrating human capabilities to council experts, but he was learning more from them than they were from him. Their technology was undeniably more advanced, but it was also strangely limited. Council ships could travel faster than light and manipulate gravity, but their manufacturing processes had not changed in thousands of years. Their weapons could destroy planets, but the designs were identical to ones used by their ancestors. Their computers could process vast amounts of data, but they could not adapt or learn from new situations the way human computers were beginning to do. Sam realized that the council species had reached a point where they no longer needed to innovate. Their technology worked perfectly for their needs, their societies were stable, and they had eliminated most forms of conflict. This should have been paradise, but instead it had created stagnation. They had stopped growing as civilizations because they no longer needed to grow. Warcast Thrun paced through his chambers like a caged predator. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and his instincts were screaming warnings about these new humans. They were not physically impressive, and their weapons were primitive by council standards. But there was something about them that set off every danger signal his millions of years of evolution had developed. Thrun had studied the recordings of human behavior during their first contact procedures. They adapted to new situations faster than should have been possible. When faced with alien mathematics, they learned the concepts in hours rather than years. When shown council technology, they immediately began thinking of ways to improve it, rather than simply admiring its superiority. The reptilian warrior understood what Administrator Kexmoth did not. The humans were not just another species to be classified and managed. They were a force of change that could disrupt the careful balance the Council had maintained for millennia. If they were allowed to spread their influence, they would start other species thinking in ways that challenged the established order. Captain Jake Morrison found himself standing before the full Galactic Council in a chamber so vast that he could barely see the far walls. Hundreds of species were represented in the Great Hall, each delegation sitting in areas designed for their particular biology. Some floated in tanks of liquid, others hung from the ceiling, and a few existed as energy patterns that spoke through. Mechanical translators. Council. Prime Zethkalar rose from the center of the assembly. The crystalline being had led the council for 400 years, making decisions based on wisdom accumulated over centuries of experience. His voice resonated through the chamber without need for translation as he addressed the human captain. Ikao, Prime asked Jake to demonstrate human capabilities for the assembled delegates. This was the moment that would determine how humanity would be classified and what role they would play in galactic civilization. Jake could show them human weapons, human ships, or human science. Instead, he chose to show them something that no council species had seen in thousands of years. Jake presented them with a problem that had puzzled council engineers for decades. The food distribution system for Nexus Prime worked efficiently, but it required enormous amounts of energy to maintain. Every solution the council had tried involved building more power generators or finding more efficient energy sources. Instead of suggesting more advanced technology, Jake proposed something radical. He suggested changing the distribution pattern itself. By reorganizing how food moved through the station and adjusting delivery schedules based on actual consumption rather than theoretical needs, the system could be made vastly more efficient, without any new technology at all. The silence in the great chamber was absolute. For the first time in living memory, someone had suggested changing an established system rather than simply making it more powerful. The concept was so foreign to council thinking that many delegates needed time to understand what Jake was proposing. Ambassador Veltar of the Serpentine species was the first to speak. His kind specialized in manipulation and control, and he immediately recognized the threat that human thinking represented. If other species began questioning established systems and proposing changes, it would undermine the authority structure that kept the council stable. But before Veltar could voice his objections, something unprecedented happened. Young delegates from several species began asking questions about the human proposal. These were recent additions to the council who had not yet learned to accept everything without question. They wanted to know why such solutions had never been tried before. Dr. Rodriguez watched from the gallery as the chamber erupted into the first genuine debate the council had experienced in centuries. Species that had not spoken to each other in decades were suddenly engaged in animated discussions about efficiency, adaptation, and change. The humans had not introduced new technology or superior firepower. They had introduced something far more dangerous to the established order: new ways of thinking. Administrator Kexmoth realized with growing horror that his classification system was completely inadequate for dealing with humanity. They could not be placed in any existing category because they did not specialize in any single approach to problems. Instead, they seemed to combine methods from all categories and create entirely new solutions. The administrator sent urgent messages to the Conservative Council, warning them that humanity represented an existential threat to galactic civilization, not through conquest or war, but through the spread of ideas that could destabilize the careful order that had maintained peace for thousands of years. As the great debate continued in the council chamber, Jake Morrison stood quietly at its center, watching alien civilizations discover concepts that humans took for granted. He was beginning to understand that humanity had not just stumbled into a larger universe, they had stumbled into a universe that had forgotten how to change and grow, and their presence was about to remind everyone what they had lost. Engineer Casey Miller sat in her assigned workspace on Nexus Prime, surrounded by data screens that showed information about every system on the massive station. The council had given her access to their databases as part of the Cultural Exchange program, expecting her to be impressed by their advanced technology. Instead, she was horrified by what she was discovering. The station's power grid was a masterpiece of engineering that had operated flawlessly for over 1,000 years, but Casey could see that it was running at only 60% efficiency, because nobody had bothered to optimize the power routing algorithm since it was first built. The waste was enormous, enough to power several Earth-sized planets. She began writing her first report, documenting how simple changes to the grid management software could increase efficiency by almost 40%. The modifications would not require new technology or major construction. They only needed someone to question why things were done the way they had always been done. Historian Yuldendis floated in his archive chamber, his gaseous form shifting through spectrums of light that indicated deep contemplation. For 10,000 years, he had maintained the records of galactic civilization, cataloging every major event and breakthrough. The arrival of humanity had prompted him to review patterns he had not considered in millennia. The ancient being discovered something troubling in the historical data. Every significant advancement in council technology, every breakthrough in science or medicine, every innovation that had improved galactic civilization had come from species during their first few centuries of membership. After they became established in the council hierarchy, innovation stopped. Species would join the council with revolutionary ideas and dynamic cultures. Within a few hundred years, they would settle into their assigned roles and stop changing. Their contributions would become predictable and routine. The council system seemed designed to take creative, innovative civilizations and turn them into specialized but static components of a larger machine. Yuldendis realized that humanity represented the first genuinely innovative species to join the council in over 1,000 years. If the pattern held true, they would eventually be absorbed into the system and lose their ability to think in new ways. But what if the pattern could be broken this time? What if humanity could inspire others to rediscover their capacity for change? Security Chief Rex Murphy walked the corridors of Nexus Prime with the practiced eye of a former soldier. His job was officially to provide security for the human delegation, but he was really gathering intelligence about potential threats to his people. What he was finding worried him more than any weapon or hostile fleet. The Conservative Council was meeting in secret, discussing what they called the human problem. Rex had managed to intercept fragments of their communications, and the content was disturbing. They viewed humanity not as a new member species to be welcomed, but as a disease that could spread dangerous ideas throughout their carefully ordered civilization. Warcast Thrun was leading the faction that wanted humanity expelled immediately. He argued that human influence was already causing instability among younger council members. Ambassador Veltar supported a more subtle approach, suggesting that humans could be controlled through careful manipulation and isolation. But the most dangerous voice belonged to Prime Zareth, an ancient entity that had helped establish the current council system. Zareth believed that humanity should be allowed to remain, but only after being fundamentally changed to fit existing categories. The methods he proposed for accomplishing this change made Rex's blood run cold. Young Council. Member Zaralyn entered her first major council session with excitement and nervousness. Her species had joined the council only 50 years ago, and she was still learning the complex protocols and traditions that governed galactic civilization. She had been taught to observe quietly and defer to the wisdom of more experienced members. But the human proposals had sparked something in her that she had not felt since her species first reached for the stars. The idea that systems could be changed and improved rather than simply maintained was revolutionary. Her own people had once been explorers and innovators, but they had gradually settled into their assigned role as mineral processors for the Council. Zara Lynn began to wonder what her species might have accomplished if they had not been channeled into such a narrow specialization. More dangerously, she began to wonder what they might still accomplish if they rediscovered their original, creative spirit. Casey Miller finished her third report and prepared to submit it to the Council Engineering Committee. This one focused on the communication network that connected all Council worlds. The system worked perfectly, but it was designed like a wheel with Nexus Prime at the center. Every message had to pass through the central hub, creating bottlenecks and delays. Her proposed solution was a mesh network that would allow direct communication between any 2 points in Council space. The technology already existed, but implementing it would reduce the Central Authority's control over information flow. Casey understood that her technical recommendations were becoming political statements, whether she intended them to be or not. The response to her reports was immediate and divisive. Younger Council members and recently admitted species embraced her suggestions with enthusiasm. They began forming working groups to study human optimization techniques and adapt them to their own systems and cultures. But established Council leadership reacted with alarm. Administrator Kexmoth issued official statements warning against unauthorized changes to proven systems. The Conservative Council began circulating documents that portrayed human influence as a threat to galactic stability and order. Dr. Paul Martinez arrived on Nexus Prime as part of the second wave of human specialists. As a sociologist, his job was to study how human presence was affecting alien societies. What he found was a civilization in the early stages of dramatic transformation. Species that had not communicated directly in centuries were forming new alliances based on shared interest in change and innovation. Young members of ancient civilizations were challenging their elders' authority for the first time in recorded history. Traditional hierarchies were being questioned by those at the bottom who had previously accepted their positions without complaint. The most dramatic example was occurring among the Velcoris, a species known for their rigid caste system and absolute obedience to authority. Young Velcoris who had studied human organizational theories were beginning to suggest that their society's structure might not be the only possible way to arrange civilization. This was unprecedented in galactic history. The Velcoris had not experienced internal social change in over 2 million years. The fact that they were even discussing alternative social structures was sending shockwaves through the Council leadership. Captain Jake Morrison found himself at the center of a political storm he had never intended to create. What had begun as simple technical exchanges between species had evolved into a challenge to the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. He met with progressive Council members who wanted humanity to lead a reform movement that would modernize and revitalize the ancient system. He was approached by conservative factions who wanted to limit human influence and maintain traditional stability. Both sides expected him to choose their position and support their goals. But Jake realized that humanity's greatest contribution was not picking sides in alien political disputes. It was demonstrating that there were always more options than anyone had considered. Instead of joining either faction, he proposed something that shocked everyone. He suggested that the Council itself needed to evolve. Rather than trying to force humanity into existing categories or using human ideas to reform the current system, why not create something entirely new? A form of government that combined the best aspects of Council stability with human adaptability and innovation. The proposal split the Council more dramatically than any event in its 3,000-year history. For the first time, member species found themselves choosing between preserving the past and embracing an uncertain but potentially revolutionary future. The decision would determine not just humanity's place in galactic civilization, but whether that civilization would continue to exist in its current form. The galaxy was discovering that some changes, once started, could not be controlled or stopped. Humanity had not conquered galactic civilization through superior force. They had done something far more dramatic. They had reminded it how to grow. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched through her flagship's main viewer as Earth's second contact fleet emerged from hyperspace near Nexus Prime. 27 ships of humanity's most advanced designs spread out in formation around her command vessel, the UES Liberty. Unlike Captain Morrison's accidental arrival, this was a deliberate demonstration of human capability and commitment to galactic affairs. Kate had been chosen for this mission because of her combination of military experience and diplomatic training. Earth's government understood that First Contact had evolved into something far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Humanity was not just joining galactic civilization, they were inadvertently transforming it. The fleet carried more than weapons and defensive systems. Mobile research stations, manufacturing ships, and vessels designed for long-term space construction accompanied the military escorts. Thousands of human specialists in every field from medicine to agriculture had volunteered for assignment to Council space. Earth was making a clear statement about its intentions to become a permanent and influential part of galactic society. Prime Zareth convened an emergency session of the Conservative Bloc as soon as the human fleet was detected. The ancient entity had observed the rise and fall of civilizations across millions of years, and he recognized the signs of systemic collapse. The arrival of additional humans with advanced technology and revolutionary ideas represented an existential threat to the order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. The Conservative Bloc controlled nearly 60% of Council votes through traditional alliances and hierarchical loyalty. Prime Zareth was confident that he could force through a resolution demanding humanity's immediate expulsion from Council space. The vote was scheduled for the next full assembly session, giving the Conservatives time to pressure wavering delegates into compliance. But when the session convened, something unprecedented happened. Nearly one-third of the Council delegates refused to attend. Species that had never shown independence from traditional authority announced that they would not participate in a vote they considered illegitimate. Reform leader Velcoris had spent months building what became known as the Progressive Alliance. Using organizational principles learned from human political science, he created the first cross-species coalition in Council history. The alliance included young members of ancient species, recently admitted civilizations, and moderate delegates, who believed change was necessary for galactic survival. The alliance's first action was to declare the Conservative Bloc's emergency session invalid. They argued that major decisions affecting all Council members could not be made by factional groups acting independently. This challenge to traditional authority procedures created a constitutional crisis that the Council had no established methods for resolving. Dr. Paul Martinez documented how the political fracturing was spreading throughout Council space. Entire star systems were declaring independence from traditional Council authority and establishing new governmental structures based on human democratic principles adapted for their specific species' needs. The Velcoris homeworld experienced its first democratic election in 2 million years, with young Velcoris candidates challenging ancient caste leaders for positions of authority. The Keithmori mining colonies formed worker cooperatives that shared profits equally among all participants. 3 different warrior species established merit-based promotion systems that replaced hereditary military ranks. These changes terrified Conservative Council leadership because they demonstrated that alternatives to traditional hierarchy could actually work. Species were not descending into chaos when they abandoned ancient authority structures. Instead, they were discovering new forms of organization that increased both efficiency and satisfaction among their populations. Security Chief Rex Murphy coordinated with Admiral Sullivan as tensions escalated toward open conflict. Several conservative-controlled systems had imposed trade blockades against worlds that adopted human-influenced governments. Traditional Council enforcement fleets were being deployed to pressure rebellious colonies back into compliance. The situation reached a crisis point when conservative forces attempted to blockade the Zaralin homeworld after its government voted to join the Progressive Alliance. Human ships moved to break the blockade, creating the first direct military confrontation between Council factions in over 1,000 years. Admiral Sullivan found herself commanding a fleet in defense of alien worlds against other alien powers, all because humanity had suggested that there might be better ways to organize civilization. The irony was not lost on her that humans were fighting to protect the freedom of species they had known existed for less than a year. Dr. Claire Watson, arrived with the Second Contact Fleet as Earth's leading expert in multi-species governmental systems. Her theoretical work on xenopolitics had been purely academic until humanity encountered the Council. But now she was being asked to help design practical solutions for managing a civilization that spanned thousands of worlds and hundreds of different forms of intelligent life. Claire's first report to Admiral Sullivan and the Progressive Alliance leadership was both encouraging and sobering. The human democratic model could be adapted for multi-species use, but it would require fundamental changes to accommodate the vast differences in biology, psychology, and culture among council races. Some species thought too slowly for real-time debate and decision-making. Others had collective consciousness that made individual voting meaningless. Several races had biological castes that could not be ignored in favor of artificial equality. The challenge was creating a system that respected these differences while maintaining democratic principles of representation and choice. The breakthrough came when Claire realized that she was approaching the problem backwards. Instead of trying to create one system that worked for everyone, the new government could be a framework that allowed each species to participate in ways that suited their nature, while contributing to collective decisions through methods they found meaningful. Former Prime Zethkalar shocked the galaxy by announcing his support for governmental reform. The crystalline being who had led the traditional council for 4 centuries issued a statement acknowledging that the current system had become stagnant and ineffective. He called for a new constitutional convention that would create a government capable of adaptation and growth. Zethkalar's defection broke the conservative coalition and triggered an avalanche of support for reform. Species that had been afraid to challenge traditional authority found courage when the most respected leader in council history endorsed change. The constitutional convention that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of species worked together to design a government that had never been attempted before. Human advisors provided expertise on democratic principles, but each species contributed ideas based on their own successful social structures. The document they created established the new Galactic Council, a federal system that preserved species autonomy while enabling collective action on issues affecting the entire galaxy. Instead of rigid hierarchies based on age or traditional authority, the new system allocated influence based on contribution to collective welfare and demonstrated competence in relevant fields. Admiral Sullivan found herself appointed as the first speaker of the Integrated Defense Command, responsible for coordinating military forces from dozens of species into a unified galactic defense network. The position had been created specifically because human military doctrine emphasized cooperation between different unit types, making them ideal for managing multi-species operations. The old traditional hierarchy retained control over approximately 1/3 of council space, but their influence was rapidly declining as member species voluntarily migrated to the Progressive Alliance. Even conservative stronghold systems were experiencing internal pressure from populations who wanted to participate in the new governmental experiment. Captain Jake Morrison, who had started this transformation with a simple suggestion about food distribution efficiency, found himself designated as humanity's first permanent ambassador to the new Galactic Council. He would represent Earth's interests in a government that humanity had helped create, but did not control. The galaxy that emerged from this constitutional crisis was fundamentally different from the one that had existed when humans first arrived. Instead of ancient species locked into eternal roles, there was now a civilization capable of growth, adaptation, and change. The question that remained was whether this new system would prove strong enough to survive the challenges that awaited it among the stars. President Ellen Hayes stepped from her transport onto the docking bay of New Nexus, the capital station of the reformed Galactic Council. 5 years had passed since Captain Morrison's accidental first contact, and the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The massive station still spun in space near the galactic core, but it now housed representatives from over 1,000 species working together in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. Ellen carried the authority of Earth's first elected galactic representative, chosen by humanity to represent their interests in the new multi-species democracy. Her election had been watched by species across the galaxy, many of whom were holding their own democratic processes for the first time in millions of years. Speaker John Parker stood in the Great Assembly Hall addressing delegates from hundreds of worlds. The former human mediator had been chosen not because of his species but because of his proven ability to find solutions that satisfied multiple conflicting interests. His selection as speaker had required approval from representatives of 70 different alien governments, proving that effective leadership could transcend species barriers. John was presenting the quarterly efficiency report that had become a symbol of the new government's commitment to continuous improvement. Under the old council, systems had remained unchanged for millennia. The new Galactic Council reviewed and optimized its operations every few months, incorporating suggestions from any citizen regardless of their species or status. The results were dramatic. Energy consumption across council space had decreased by 30%, while productivity increased by over 40%. Travel times between star systems had been reduced through improved routing algorithms. Food distribution networks that had wasted enormous resources now operated with precision efficiency. Dr. Claire Watson worked in her office in the Xenopolitical Research Center, analyzing data from the latest governmental experiments taking place across council space. Her theoretical work on multi-species democracy had become the foundation for practical systems governing billions of intelligent beings. The most successful innovation was the adaptive representation protocol that allowed each species to participate in government through methods that suited their biology and psychology. Collective consciousness species contributed through unified decisions reached by their entire populations. Individual-based species sent elected representatives. Hierarchical cultures appointed delegates based on merit and expertise. But all these different forms of participation fed into decision-making processes that were fundamentally democratic. Every citizen, regardless of species, had the ability to influence government policy through methods they understood and trusted. The system was complex, but it worked. Claire's current project involved analyzing requests from other galaxies that had heard about the new Galactic Council's success. Delegations from Andromeda and the Magellanic Clouds were asking for assistance in reforming their own governmental systems. The changes humanity had brought to the Milky Way were beginning to spread throughout the local galaxy cluster. Former Prime Zeth Kalar served as senior advisor to the Integration Committee, helping newly democratic species adapt to their expanded roles in galactic civilization. The crystalline being who had once represented ultimate traditional authority now spent his time teaching young alien politicians how to build consensus across species barriers. His office was always busy with delegations seeking advice on everything, from election procedures to conflict resolution. Zeth Kalar had discovered that helping others grow and change was far more satisfying than maintaining static systems. He often reflected on how much he had learned about leadership from observing human political methods. The transformation had not been without challenges. Several species had initially struggled with concepts like individual choice and collective responsibility. The warrior cultures found it particularly difficult to accept that strength was measured by cooperation rather than dominance. The scholar species had trouble adapting to decisions made by practical experience rather than theoretical analysis. But these challenges had been overcome through patient education and gradual adaptation. Species learned to modify democratic principles to match their cultural values, while maintaining the essential elements of representation and choice. The result was not one universal system, but hundreds of variations that all contributed to collective governance. Admiral Sullivan commanded the Integrated Defense Network from her headquarters on New Nexus. The military organization she led combined forces from dozens of species into the most effective defensive system the galaxy had ever known. Human tactical doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation, principles that proved ideal for coordinating forces with vastly different capabilities and fighting styles. The defense network's first major test came when long-range sensors detected an invasion fleet approaching from outside the galaxy. The ships were unlike anything in Council databases, suggesting they came from a civilization that had no knowledge of the political changes that had transformed galactic society. Kate immediately activated the emergency response protocols that had been developed through extensive multi-species cooperation. Within hours, defensive fleets from hundreds of worlds were moving to intercept the invasion force. The response was faster and more coordinated than anything the old council could have achieved. The invading fleet consisted of over 10,000 ships organized in traditional hierarchical battle formations. Their tactics suggested they expected to face the kind of static, predictable resistance that ancient galactic civilizations had typically provided. Instead, they encountered something completely unprecedented. The integrated defense network used principles of human military doctrine adapted for galactic-scale warfare. Instead of meeting force with force, they used mobility, deception, and adaptive tactics to confuse and outmaneuver the invaders. Multi-species battle groups combined the unique capabilities of different civilizations into hybrid formations that the enemy could not understand or counter. The battle lasted only 6 hours. The invading fleet found itself surrounded by forces that moved and fought in ways their commanders had never encountered. When their traditional tactics failed, they had no alternatives. The invasion collapsed when their leadership realized they were facing a unified galaxy capable of innovation and rapid adaptation. The victory celebration that followed was broadcast throughout Council space and beyond. Citizens of hundreds of worlds watched as human, alien, and hybrid crews worked together to secure the defeated invasion fleet. The prisoners would be treated according to galactic humanitarian standards and eventually offered the choice of returning home or joining the civilization they had tried to conquer. President Hayes used the victory as an opportunity to announce the establishment of the Galactic Exploration Initiative. This joint human-alien project would send mixed crews beyond the galaxy to make contact with other civilizations and share the governmental innovations that had transformed the Milky Way. The exploration ships would carry more than advanced technology and scientific equipment. They would carry the most valuable discovery humanity had brought to galactic civilization: the knowledge that societies could change and grow, rather than remaining locked in eternal stagnation. Captain Morrison, now serving as Director of Interspecies Relations, reflected on how much had changed since his ship had accidentally discovered Nexus Prime. Humanity had not conquered galactic civilization through superior technology or military force. They had transformed it by demonstrating that growth and change were not only possible, but necessary for long-term survival. The greatest gift humans had given to their alien allies was not any specific innovation or technique. It was the understanding that civilizations, like the individuals who comprised them, needed to continue learning and evolving throughout their existence. The alternative was the slow death of stagnation that had been claiming the galaxy for thousands of years. As John Parker concluded another successful council session with representatives returning to hundreds of different worlds, he considered the future that humanity and their allies were building together. The new Galactic Council was not perfect, and it would continue to evolve as they learned better ways to govern a multi-species civilization. But it was alive in a way that the old system had never been. It could adapt to new challenges, incorporate new ideas, and grow stronger through change rather than being weakened by it. The galaxy that would emerge from this foundation would be capable of achievements that no single species could have imagined. Humanity had kept its promise to change the Galactic Council forever. But in doing so, they had also changed themselves, becoming part of something larger and more wonderful than any single world could have created alone. The future belonged to all of them, and it was full of possibilities that no one had yet dreamed.